Hey, welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Caleb Teskey, with another great guest for you guys this afternoon. Let's do our housekeeping off the top. Just yesterday, had a great interview with Jamie Toth, Data Witch, who's been uncovering a lot of interesting findings in the lab testing world as it pertains to potency inflation and aspergillus. Great show with Doc Ray the other day out in California. Doc Ray Genetics, Army Green Beret, breeder, cultivator. I had a special 420 interview with Luke Steinke from Bird's Eye Botanicals here in Vermont. I had 3 members of the Cannabis Farmers Alliance, which kind of has led into this interview here. And I also got some really good stuff coming up. I think I'm going to have to push my interview with Luke Carlin for tomorrow because I just have not had enough time to research what he's doing. Some excellent interviews he's had with Burner and documentaries about the sour diesel and really fascinating stuff. And then on Sunday, I got James Davis from Bay Staters. They're working on decriminalizing psychedelics or mushrooms, at least, down in Massachusetts. Then I got Lester Black on April 30th from SF Gate. If you guys haven't checked out Lester's work, boy, he's one of a handful of journalists in this country that are covering cannabis that I really have a ton of love for. Yeah, I think that's about it for homework. And as I said, this interview stems from my contacts in New York that I interviewed the other day. I was super interested about this news in New York, which we'll get to later. But without further ado, please let me introduce my guest. He's the co-founder of the Roaring 420s Lounge in New York, and he is a member of the Cannabis Association of New York. It's John Averill. And please, you're going to have to unmute your mic, John.
Apologies.
Yep, there we go, John. Hey, thanks for being here today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's
cool.
quite a guest list you've had in the past, so I feel a little trepidation. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, before we do anything serious, John, would you mind sharing with us a 5-minute life story?
Okay, I can try. So by day, I'm a software developer in the tech industry. I work for one of the world's largest managed service providers, and I came up kind of through the technology and data industry. I've smoked weed. I've been a cannabis consumer for a really long time, since I was, not probably technically old enough to smoke. And I kind of came at this from a data perspective. A few friends of mine and I used to go to, pop-up events here in Western New York when cannabis was first legalized in New York State. A good friend of mine got very sick consuming something that probably, we never found out what was in it, but wasn't safe for sure. And we'd made a bunch of friends, and we knew a bunch of people who were kind of legacy operators in the industry. And we kind of took an interest in testing products and confirming product safety by and large, as well as potency. So we started collecting samples from local vendors, and we would just pay to test them at a laboratory that was owned by a friend of mine. We started to discover about 10% of those products on the market were unsafe. So I guess we took an interest, and, we started out of my basement, but basically we started going to pop-up events, and we would ask vendors for more product than we needed to test. And we would start the products that passed, we would start handing them out for free at those events and asking people to take our survey about it. Kind of come a long way from there. But after a while, we realized it was best to have a physical location where that sort of data could be collected in mass. We could start to compare those survey data collected to like terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles that we were pulling from our laboratory partner. And that led to like some software we built, because as I said, I'm a software engineer by day, and our CTO, a friend of mine, is a professional web developer. So we put together some cannabis software for consumption facilities, and started playing around with that, and like as a method of ingestion of that data to compare to those surveys and a method of collection of those surveys. We eventually established a private membership association, which is an exemption in New York State for indoor consumption. We're able to consume indoors as long as everyone who works for this association is a volunteer who isn't compensated in any fashion. It's a law in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act here in New York State. So we established that. We established a physical location. We started to grow and establish kind of a lounge for people to participate in cannabis research and development, basically.
And for the rest of this, I'm gonna slap you over here in the big box, John, because I've done about 250 interviews now, and you are the first person who is trying to get into the lounge game that I've had on the show. I'd love if you would explain to people what that process has looked like for you in New York.
Well, it's a weird situation in New York. There is no license type in the New York, legal market to allow on-site consumption. It hasn't been established yet. There's a plan for the future existence of like a licensed consumption facility, and the regulations that are being released are starting to sort of touch on how that will work, but it's still very undeveloped, and there's not even an application process for that license type yet, due to the slow rollout here in the state. So what we are is we're a private club. We're a private membership association. The exact phrasing in the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act is we're a private membership association for which all duties with respect to the association are performed by member volunteers who are not compensated. State Clean Indoor Air Act, which would prevent the consumption of tobacco or cannabis indoors in any commercial establishment. So the only way that you can be a commercial business of sorts, you still have to be a nonprofit, but the only way you can be a business that allows the consumption of cannabis indoors in New York State is to be this weird social club, to just not make any money, to remain for profit, not pay anyone, things like that. So the way we work is our members pay dues to access our facility, and that's it. Our member volunteers who work here, our volunteer bud tenders and member services people, even our cooks, they're not paid, and any product that they might be serving, quote unquote, to members here, it's all free of charge. There's no catch or anything other than the need to submit surveys in our application about the product as you try it. They just take those products into their possession up to the legal limit here in New York State, and then they just give it away for free to anyone who asks. So it's a weird model currently. Our hope is in the future we'll be able to be a formal on-site consumption facility, in which case we would be able to be open to the public as a place of general assembly, and we'd be able to sell products at the bar the way that a bar sells beer or alcohol.
What were you saying about the Clean Air Act or something you mentioned?
Yeah, New York's Clean Indoor Air Act, which is it's the law that prevents smoking inside of a restaurant or a bar or a place of business in New York State.
And so, to me, that's the one thing that's sort of confused me about the lounge model. It's like, you have to pay for this commercial real estate, assumedly. And, if you're not able to make money off that, like if you were attached to a dispensary where you could sell weed or something, I could see that working. But, and it does seem like the one loophole is this model where you can do the member fees and something like that. Is that accurate?
To a degree. I don't know that I would call it a loophole, because a loophole gets you around something and gets you to the destination that you're trying to get to, whereas this is a different model. We can't make money. I can't pay myself. I have spent a lot of money, as have my partners, to be here, and truthfully we can't profit from it in any way, and we never will in this model anyway. And that's, to me, that doesn't make it a loophole. It's a different thing.
Sure.
We're a social club, and we've more and more grown into that. Truthfully, it's become, I will say that when we started, it was kind of what you talked about. We did sort of have the mindset that it was like, okay, well, this is a temporary thing we're doing until we can be a for-profit consumption facility. But over time, we've met so many people, and it's become its own thing. And I think that honestly, the social club, the membership association of cannabis consumers, it's probably going to continue after, even if that licensing is dropped and we get a license and we're able to start selling, the club's probably still going to be a thing because it really matters to us at this point, and it's made a difference.
And from what I've heard in New York, it's legal to smoke like outside, anywhere you could smoke a cigarette. Is that accurate?
Correct. The New York State Clean Indoor Air Act prevents smoking within 20 feet of the entrance to a building. It prevents smoking in certain public places. And there are policies against smoking in most of the state parks and most of the community parks in the state of New York as well. But as far as like walking down the street, on the sidewalk, that sort of thing, it's perfectly legal to smoke a joint just as much as it is to smoke.
So you can smoke when you're walking down the sidewalk with a bunch of people, but not like in the park?
Correct. Which is, problematic.
Yeah, that just, because the park is where I'd like to go to smoke a joint and not like on the sidewalk where I'm blowing smoke on a bunch of other people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's kind of one of the weird parts about that, I guess, loophole for private membership associations is that the way a private membership association works is club facilities, club space is whatever the club has control of in terms of space. So what that means is that we have the ability to extend that exemption to the New York State Clean Indoor Air Act to any space that we have legal control over, which means any park that we rent a pavilion in, that pavilion is a smoking allowed area with an exemption to the New York State Clean Indoor Air Act. If we lease a space anywhere, in a commercial space, we can smoke there because we are a private membership association of volunteers.
Huh. That's an interesting nugget there, John. I'm wondering how you maybe turn this into like another type of license for a cannabis business as opposed to having to do it through the private membership model. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a plan that the state has. Our current regulatory structure, which is somewhat in question right now from a legal perspective, but that regulatory structure includes a difference in definition between a consumption facility and a limited consumption facility. And a limited consumption facility is just like a room attached to a dispensary that once you buy something, you can go and smoke in there. They can't have a point of sale solution in that facility, in that room. They can't sell you anything in there. They can't even have attendants or like brand representatives in there. It's literally just a room in which you can smoke. And then there's the full consumption facility. And that's outlined as a theoretical concept in the regulatory structure in the sense that you'd be able to sell, you'd be able to have a point of sale solution to sell at retail, but at a bar for on-site consumption only. And that there'd be rules about how people could basically your bud tenders could reseal the packages after it's been purchased to allow people to take it home with them. But you'd be capped at like the quantity that you'd be allowed to sell to an individual. It's aimed at on-site consumption. You'd also be able to sell in smaller unpackaged quantities in theory. So you'd be able to like open, say, like, a bucket of rosin and serve someone a single dab and sell them that single dab instead of selling them the bucket of rosin.
Which would be nice because I don't need a fucking bucket of rosin.
Exactly. I mean, I do, but I do understand the point. Is most people don't.
Okay. And I was going to ask you about finding a location because that seems really hard for licensed businesses in New York, but it sounds like maybe you're not subject to some of those same rules because of the way you've structured your organization.
I mean, to a degree, we weren't, but also that was actually a problem for us in the sense that we don't we're a model that doesn't exist anywhere else. So the concept of our business was confusing and scary to landlords by and large. it seemed like a huge liability to them, and that we could be temporary, we could be shut down at any moment. We met with 17 landlords. We toured 17 sites before we found our first location in Cheektowaga, which was like tiny. It had an occupancy of 70 people. It was just this little bar, this little converted house that we turned into a little bar, and it was the best we could do. We were way overcharged. We were paying basically twice the value of the property. We had agreements in place with the landlord for furnishing and all kinds of different like parts of the agreement that he was supposed to provide, and he basically defaulted on all of them. And there wasn't really anything we could do about it for a long time, because we had to exist for 2 years and stay alive before anyone would even accept that we were going to exist in the long term. So, we moved downtown here in January, and that was actually, this facility that we're in now is phenomenal. It's like an actual commercial building. It's a former, like a historic building here in Buffalo. It's been a bar a bar and restaurant for as long as I've been alive. And, it's more to our needs to a large degree. We've more than doubled our occupancy. We have, multiple floors and a proper bar. And it's a huge improvement, but it took us forever to get to that point. And we had to basically willingly be taken advantage of for a substantial period of time in order to establish enough credibility to be able to be treated as a real business. And I think that everyone in the cannabis space, to a degree, deals with that same stigma, if only because their landlords know that they can't have real bank accounts, and they can't really, they have to do everything in cash, and that they deal with all kinds of weird liabilities and limitations in all states. And that has to make it difficult everywhere to find commercial property.
Do you feel like cannabis business, you said, like, you hinted at this, but do you feel like cannabis businesses are being taken advantage of by, like I've seen some of the banking fees, insurance companies, even the contractors who come to do these build outs. Do you have any thoughts on that, John?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Throughout every industry, they're paying different weird little taxes to a degree for just being a cannabis business. They're getting less respect. They're getting less reservation of people's time for marketing meetings. They're getting less attention. They're getting less and sometimes negative attention. And then those are just the quiet things. But like the more direct things are they're paying more for rent. They have additional armored car services and transport services costs that they pay because they have to use faraway banks that are not insured by the FDIC. And they have to have that money transported in cash to be cash deposited at their bank for them. They often deal with like weird problems with digital billing, in the sense that they can't have traditional bank accounts with traditional merchant services by and large. So the way that they can pay by ACH debit and pay like ongoing recurring bills gets weird, and they often end up paying small additional fees every time they process something like that. There are hundreds of little ways where the federal illegality of cannabis results in weird little taxation for cannabis businesses.
I like to call it death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes, absolutely. It feels that way.
And here's LinkedIn user. You had me at bucket of rosin. Yeah, I don't know who that is. LinkedIn is not fucking connecting to my account recently, and so I can't get names. But I'd like to transition here. That half hour left, and I want to know sort of about your the Cannabis Association of New York, and why you decided to become a member there. And then we'll pull up this news story that came out a week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was.
Okay. Well, as far as why we became a member there, it's basically because we didn't have a choice. If we wanted to be taken seriously as a cannabis business in the state of New York, we pretty much had to be a member. They're effectively the only big tent organization in New York. There's like the Cannabis Processors Association. There's a few other, a Farmers Association. There's a few other associations that, because we are a micro business applicant, which is like the only vertically integrated license type, there's a couple of those other organizations that we could technically be a part of, because we will eventually be cultivating, we will eventually be processing and things like that. so we could kind of join some of those other groups.
Do you want to name those groups?
Well, like you've interviewed some of them. Like the Cannabis Farmers Association is a great example.
Alliance, I believe. Cannabis
Alliance.
Farmers.
I'm sorry, you're right. All I remembered was it's CFA.
No.
But there's a few others. They're smaller. They're like more regional. Like there's a Buffalo Cannabis Society. There's a few, not many, statewide organizations, and they're very specific to the, like there's the Retailers and Association and things like that. But they're all focused. And when it comes to CANY, the Cannabis Association of New York, it's meant to be the big tent organization. Any cannabis business can become a part of this. We're going to group advocate. We're going to do sort of like grassroots organizing across all cannabis businesses through this tent. And that's, there's the same thing for liquor stores in the state of New York. There's the same thing for bars in the state of New York. And that is what CANY was supposed to be, is the cannabis version of that in our state.
And this is LinkedIn user again, New York Small Pharma. I don't know if that means anything to you, but hey, thanks for tuning in. And we got Michael.
Sounds familiar. I think it might be another one of those small groups.
Yeah,
that I was referring to.
Yeah, cool. We got Michael here, 420. Yeah, I was getting high, but I didn't realize it was that time.
Oh shit! I missed it. Oh well.
That's all right. I've done it so many times. So what does a CANY membership look like? I assume there's like member fees, and I'm curious if you know maybe how many members there are within that group.
I think it's something like 1,290, give or take. Wow. But at least that's how many users there are in the Slack channel. I don't know that they report. In fact, I've never received any reporting from CANY on anything to do with the organization, truthfully. So I have no idea how many formal members they actually have. Someone who's another member once told me that they thought there were only like 400 members. I had thought it was substantially larger than that. But as I mentioned, I've never actually seen any formal numbers or reporting from CANY, and I've been a member for almost a year now.
What types of communications do you receive from them?
There's a Slack channel that was created, a Slack workspace that was created, and I have access to that. It's like a public, not public, but a all CANY member chat with some additional channels for specific regions and different areas. I occasionally get a newsletter email that's like put out by, signed by the president, Damian Cornwell. That's it. And it's generally fairly straightforward, like it's literally a newsletter, like just links to things that I generally have already seen because I do cannabis market research for a living. It doesn't ever refer to anything about how the organization is structured or much of its planning at all. There was once an email I received from CANY that basically outlined this year's advocacy targets, basically, where like these are the things that we're trying to argue for. I've never really seen any of those things come up since that email came out, and this whole thing that is going down with the letter to the CCB and limiting licenses, that was definitely not on the list.
Maybe you could, real quick, before I pull that story up, I was gonna ask you, like, what are the pros and cons of being a member of CANY so far?
Truthfully, I haven't found many benefits. At this point, I've met a few people through CANY, but honestly, they were mostly local people who I probably had already met in most cases, or would certainly have met anyway, just in interacting with other cannabis businesses in my area. I've gotten a great deal of frustration out of it. As far as cons are concerned, I would say that's the big one. It's these sorts of messages that I disagree with would probably have been coming out regardless of me being a member or not. But being a member has made me more angry about them as they're released than I would be if I weren't a member. So the frustrations have been a lot higher. It's not that expensive. It's only $500 a year, which, I mean, seems reasonable, considering how much it could be. But also, like I said, I can't think really of any positive benefit I've received from it at all as of this point.
So let's pull up the story. Sorry, my mic's feeding back a little bit here. I want to pull up the story here from the New York Post. And let's see. The story is by Carl Campanile. I don't know how you say that. It's from April 14th. Don't flood market with legal pot shops. New York cannabis industry warns. And come down. Have you seen this story?
Mm-hmm.
I assume. Okay.
That is the article that was posted in that Slack channel. That's how I discovered we had sent that letter to begin with.
Okay, so we've got these comments here from Danny and Cornwell. We are writing to express our deep concern regarding the CCB's recent discussions about dramatically increasing the number of cannabis licenses in the state. Thank you for sharing all about your business too. But this is why I connected with you. I saw some comments on Instagram. I was really curious to learn that some of the CANY members may not have been pleased with that messaging as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, John.
I'm curious about it, truthfully. The majority of members of the Cannabis Association of New York are prospective licensees. We're people who have paid already to apply for a cannabis license, and we're sitting and we're waiting, and we're probably going to still be waiting in 6 months. And excuse me, that's what I get for smoking right before you ask a question. You
have to apologize on my show.
I believe the literal opposite of what that email says. I think at this point, arguing to slow down in any way the issuance of licensing that has taken almost 4 years at this point to come out at all, is like, it's utter insanity. The idea that our business is like something like we're number 3,340 something on the second queue of licenses that was released. In random number generator was used to randomize those lists, and that means that roughly about 5,000 or so applications are ahead of mine to be reviewed, and most people in the state of New York who own a cannabis business are in the same boat. Most of us, we're looking at already long timelines that may lead to us never getting a license at all. And for us to all be of an advocacy group that is making the argument that anything but all of those licenses should be issued is offensive to me personally, like deeply. It bothers me to be paying people to argue an argument that would mean that my business doesn't get its license. It's ridiculous.
And I'm going to cut you off for a second, because it seems like from all the people I talked to from the Cannabis Farmers Alliance, the state of New York is already way behind on issuing not only retail licenses, but cultivation licenses. Are we on track there? Yeah.
They're way behind by even their own numbers. Every time they release a date, any deadline of any variety that they define, they blow past it without even coming close to meeting it. It's not even, we're not talking about like short misses. We're talking about like wild discrepancies between what they have promised and what is actually being delivered. I'm like I mentioned earlier, I'm a software developer by day. That's what I do. And my job is generally to define my own deadlines and fulfill those deadlines. And if I had the kind of performance that the state of New York, the Office of Cannabis Management, has had on delivering on my own deadlines, I would have been fired a long, long time ago.
And I'm supposed to here. Let me slap this back up. I'm with John Averill here from the Roaring 420s Lounge. And John, I do want to read these couple questions that I sent you earlier. And this was, yeah. Sometimes I have to mute my mic too from coughing. So, and I'm just going to read these the way they were written to me. If you have any thoughts, please comment. If not, we could skip to the next one. But here he said, maybe one good question is, some people say that CANY carries water for the agency it is supposed to work against at times for its members. Like the onerous cultivation regulations were coming hard and fast, and CANY basically said nothing could be done. That harmed a lot of farmers. Any thoughts on that statement?
I couldn't agree more. I think that this recent letter to the Cannabis Control Board is exactly the same kind of thing happening again. It's CANY who are supposed to, in exactly these types of scenarios, stand up for those of us who are being harmed by this slow rollout, and instead of doing that, instead of standing up and speaking truth to power, they stand up and argue the OCM's case for them to the Cannabis Control Board. It's nonsensical to me. I don't understand. This was the perfect opportunity because, and the thing that not a lot of people talk about, and like even that reporter in that article won't talk about because it's, arguably hearsay, even though everyone knows it's true, is that the Cannabis Control Board was actively in conversation about potentially releasing all the licenses that were currently in the queue and just reviewing them all and approving them all to get this industry moving. And that back channel conversation is what triggered this letter being sent in the first place. So CANY discovered on our behalf information that wasn't even disseminated to us yet, but the leadership learned that a decision that could have been greatly beneficial to many of us members was being contemplated. And before they even talked to us about it, they sent a letter to that control board advocating for literally the opposite of what they were actively talking about doing.
How did you find that out? Was that in a FOIA request or something? How was that learned?
I can't really say, but I do believe it to be true.
Okay. I'd love to find out about that later, John. Boy, that's a great
Perhaps.
point.
But even if it isn't true, the argument is still contrary to all of our best interests. And the thing that blows my mind about the whole thing is they could have actually shown value for their organization by taking this opportunity to stand up on our behalf, because the CCB was already debating that sweeping change. And if an organization like CANY had supported it at that time, at that linchpin time, they probably would have succeeded at actually doing it. And that would have made CANY thousands of people's hero. They would have greatly benefited themselves and every member of the organization by doing so. And instead, they carried water for the OCM.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say that maybe the leadership at CANY is not looking out for their members, or maybe kind of hung you guys out to dry without any type of notice?
That is 100% what happened. And it felt self-serving to me, given that Damian Cornwell holds a card license. Like, for someone who has no competition and effectively a monopoly on his region of the market, to be making the argument that less licenses should be issued and more consideration should be given to our practices and take some more time to involve other stakeholders in the decision is a ridiculous conversation to me. It's offensive.
And the last one I have here is this other comment from the same dude who I read the first one from. Said recent NYCI story suggested that the new president of CANY is communicating with Damian Fagan, who is now on administrative leave. And I've followed some of that, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I probably am not as close to that as the people who told me.
Well, what I do know is that, yes, Damian Fagan is on administrative leave, and that there's been, well, all I can really say is that a large number of rumors as to exactly what the impropriety that has him on that administrative leave, what the extent of it was, I can't say for sure. I've heard some things, but all I can really say is that anyone involved on that level with the OCM who is actively on administrative leave from that organization under any cloud of any variety to be, for the president of the Cannabis Association of New York to be communicating with that person, especially in a non-public fashion, like maybe interviewing him or speaking to him on behalf of CANY and reporting those conversations directly could be of value in certain circumstances. But I could never imagine how a back channel conversation that the rest of us don't even know he's having could ever be of any benefit to us. If anything, that's another example of the kind of impropriety and concerns that I have about CANY.
John, I'm going to slap your logo back up here once again. I got John Averill here from the Roaring 420s Lounge. I got to plug my computer back in because it's dying. It's been a fascinating conversation, John. That's about all the questions I have. However, I do like to leave space at the end for my guest to anything we missed that you think is important. Or actually, here's one question I like to throw at people. If you could rewrite the legislation in your state, what would you change? What would you delete? And what would you add to it to make this market move forward in a better direction?
I'll be honest, from my perspective, there's really only one thing that I think needs to be changed, is I think that the legislation should expressly state that no limitation on the number of licenses can be given. And I think that would fix everything. I think overregulation isn't really a problem in the long run in the state of New York because A, everyone here already expects overregulation. That's what New York is. And then B, New York is it's an argumentative place. We're a state that actively likes to reconsider our legislation on a constant basis. So the odds of any overregulation being resolved over time in changes to that regulation are very strong. They're very good. So there's really nothing that I'm worried about in terms of all that other regulation. It can be changed later. I'm fine with it. But the fact that the OCM has the ability to pick and choose the number of licenses that they give out is the biggest problem in our regulatory framework. It should be just like the SLA. It should be just like any form of licensing where requirements are met, licenses are given. It's just that simple. It should be up to the free market to decide what the appropriate number of cannabis businesses for the state of New York actually is. For a state agency to be guessing at that number and then enforcing it on the rest of us is insane.
Do you think those regulators have the type of experience required to make those kind of calls in the cannabis industry?
I don't think anyone does. I don't think anyone could predict what this market can sustain. And anyone who says that they can, as a cannabis market researcher, I think is lying.
Word up, John. Shameless plugs or shout outs. Maybe you could tell people where they could learn about your business before we get out of here. I want to thank you so much for your time. And one more shameless slap. John Averill, the Roaring 420s Lounge.
Yeah, roaring420slounge.com or just Google us. There's a lot of links online. We're pretty digitally present. As far as shameless shout outs are concerned, I would really like to say that there are people who would like to be shouted out on this conversation, but I can't do that today. There's a long list of people, but we're not quite ready to talk about who we are in terms of members of CANY yet. We're really hoping that our organization will see the light of day and see that the members are who they need to support. So I'm standing here hoping that we won't need to start naming those names.
And if any of the board members of CANY would like to talk to me, please put us in touch. I'm going to sign it off here, John. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm your host, Caleb Teskey, reminding you that the devil's in the details and the details are in the fine print.